So obviously a lot of the criticism of Israel here is based on the idea that Israel is an occupying country. It is occupying the West Bank. Now this is absurd. I mean, there's an element of truth. Yes, it's occupying it. But the fact is that Israel occupies the West Bank because it took the West Bank in an act of self-defense. It was attacked. In 1967, Jordan was asked by the Israelis explicitly not to enter the war. The war was primarily on the southern front in Egypt and on the northern front on the Golan Heights with Syria. The Jordanian king was asked not to intervene, and he chose to step in. He chose to launch a war against Israel. Read it. And Israel, in an act of self-defense, took the land. In its peace deal with Jordan, Jordan didn't want the West Bank. So Israel occupied the land in a war of self-defense against Jordan. And then Jordan refused to take it back, was not interested in it. And Israel was stuck with it. The Palestinians living there have refused time and time and time and time again to actually sign a peace agreement. A Palestinian state has been offered to them on a number of different occasions, and they refused in every one of them. They've engaged in terrorism to try to get everything that they demand, which is basically total control of that land, a right of return for Palestinians to homes in Israel that they vacated and sometimes were driven out of during a war, again, self-defense, which Israel refuses legitimately. And they reject peace deal after peace deal after peace deal. So the idea that Israel is an occupier is true, but what choice does it have exactly? Let people who actually want to destroy it just have the land unconditionally? Well, Israel did that. We've got an experiment. We've got a perfect experiment of exactly that. And that experiment is the Gaza Strip. Israel basically vacated the Gaza Strip in the early 2000s, dismantled any settlements that existed in the Gaza Strip that were run by Israelis, and handed the Gaza Strip over to the Palestinians. And what is the consequences? The consequences are that Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. A terrorist nation was born in the Gaza Strip that launches missiles, rockets, fires into Israel on a regular basis. The Gaza Strip is not occupied by Israel. And yet Israel continues to be attacked. Tunnels are built. Terrorist attacks are launched from there. Missiles are launched. So Palestinians were granted a piece of land, told that they had full autonomy on it, no occupation. They could do whatever they want except violate the rights of Israelis by launching attacks on Israel. And yet, what do? They violate the rights of their own citizens. They instill basically a theocratic, authoritarian state, and then they launch constant, regular attacks on Israel. So Israel should do the same thing on the West Bank, so they can now be attacked from two sides? Of Of course not. That would be suicide. It would be insane. Right? Now, it's fascinating that, and this is the power of altruism, in spite of the fact that Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of Israel, in spite of the fact that Hamas launches terrorist attacks on Israel regularly, in spite of the fact that they launch missiles, in spite of the fact that the Gaza Strip is is at war with Israel, Israel supplies the Gaza Strip with electricity. It supplies the Gaza Strip with water. All the electricity and water comes from lines that come from Israel. It basically is keeping alive, keeping running, keeping existing the people who literally want to kill them. Talk about altruism and self-sacrifice. Gaza Strip doesn't get its electricity from Egypt, doesn't get its water from Egypt, which it has a border with in the southwest. It gets it from... Yeah, Jeff, I saw the question. I got it. I will answer it, I promise. It'll be first, because it's a $20 question. So here you have a little state that Israel, again, does not defeat, does not crush, but allows them to launch missiles, to launch bombs, to launch fires, to just constantly harass and sometimes kill American citizens at a very low cost to Israel itself. That's altruism in foreign policy in action. And by the way, whenever it gets tough with the Gazans, America and the rest of the world start complaining about Israel, trying to cut them off, and they stop. The International Court of whatever in The Hague has tried to convict Israeli generals, Israeli politicians of crime against humanity or whatever, for what they do in the Gaza Strip. Why? When it's an act of self-defense, nobody will say.
And to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize, I know this is difficult, can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith.
On faith?
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right, all right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on Earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
May I?
All right, before we go on, reminder, Please like the show. We've got 163 live listeners right now, 30 likes. That should be at least 100. I figure at least 100 of you actually like the show. Maybe there are like 60 of the Matthews out there who hate it, but at least the people who are liking it, you know, I want to see a thumbs up. There you go. Start liking it. I want to see that go to 100. All it takes is a click of a thing. Whether you're looking at this. And you know, the likes matter. It's not an issue of my ego. It's an issue of the algorithm. The more you like something, the more the algorithm likes it. So, you know, and if you don't like the show, give it a thumbs down. Let's see your actual views being reflected in the likes. But if you like it, don't just sit there. Help get the show promoted. Of course, you should also share. And you can support the show at JaronBrookShow.com/support, or on Patreon or Subscribestar or Locals, and show your support for the work, for the value hopefully you're receiving from this. And of course, don't forget, if you're not a subscriber, even if you just come here to troll, or even if you're here like Matthew to defend Marx, then you should subscribe, because that way you'll know when to show up. You'll know what shows are on, when they're on. You'll get notified, right? So, yes, like, share, subscribe, support. Like, share, subscribe, support. There you go. Easy. Do one or all of those, please.